Joining us tonight, Fox News national security strategist and contributor, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Dr. Gorka, first, good to see you. This is quite a remarkable moment. DACA appears dead. Dick Durbin trying to drive a stake through the heart of even the idea now. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Senator Lindsey Graham, Jeff Flake. This assemblage of like-minded, open borders, pro-amnesty senators is some sort of negotiating group is pure farce, is it not?
Yes, but it's exactly indicative of what the left has created. So let's remember that speech to a group of bankers that Hillary Clinton gave as a presidential candidate that was eventually leaked to the press. Do you remember what she said in that, Lou? She said her dream is to have a borderless hemisphere. So no borders from Canada right down to South America. That's what the left is arguing for. At that point, the word America means nothing. They're grandstanding. This isn't about American interests. It's about ideological interests. And also, Lou, it's about lying. I mean, Dick Durbin's relationship to the truth, let's be charitable, it's at best elastic. Even President Obama had to go on record when Dick Durbin said things about the then Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and the White House had to deny that President Obama said anything of the sort. So whether he's talking about the left, the right, a Democrat president or Republican president, it's all about the narrative, it's all about the fight, it's not about the interests of Americans.
And Flake calling, basically saying that the president was like Stalin in the way in which he's behaving. I mean, Senator Flake is done. He can't get reelected. He is continuing to run his mouth. He is a sordid, just absolute attack dog against the Trump administration.
Senator Flake should be ashamed of himself. My parents lived under a Stalinist regime. My father was arrested and tortured and put in prison by a Stalinist regime. This man has no moral compass left anymore. Senator Flake has just insulted all those people who have died or suffered under true Stalinist regimes. He has become a parody of a politician.
And, what is this deal between the Mormons and President Trump? Not only Jeff Flake basically going after him, but also Mitt Romney today. Let's put up the full screen of what he said today. This is a man who hasn't even yet announced he's running in Utah for Senate. The poverty of an aspiring immigrant's nation of origin is as irrelevant as their race. The sentiment attributed to POTUS is inconsistent with America's history, antithetical to American values. May our memory of Dr. King buoy our hope for unity, greatness, and charity for all. I mean, that is pure nonsense as he attacks the president. The part he had to write at the end was he, of course, had to quote Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I don't think this is about the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. I think this is about people who are politically irrelevant, Lou, and who want to be relevant and are desperate. Let me just tell Mitt Romney something. All men are created equal in the image of God, but guess what? Not all nations are equal. That's why we have people risking their lives on handmade rafts to come to America. America is the greatest nation on God's earth, and some other countries are hellholes. That's just a fact.
Well, hellholes is, I believe it was Lindsey Graham who referred to some countries that way. What is going on? You've got suddenly a bunch of prigs and prudes talking like they're from, 18th, maybe 17th, century England instead of Americans. They're hardly plain spoken, and they are effusive in their hate for this president. Where's it going to end? I mean, they started by talking about the collusion. Calling him, every kind of name. That was disproved. I mean, it's been going on 6.5 years of total investigations, the committees, the FBI, special counsel, they haven't found anything. Then they started talking about, he's crazy. Then they watched him outsmart everybody in the room over immigration. as he orchestrated a discussion, and he was obviously hoping for a deal on DACA, and now they're calling him new names. Do they really think the American people are so stupid not to notice that everything the left and the Dems have called this president and the establishments of both parties has been proved untrue, false as they could be over the course of the last more than a year, 2.5 years, including the presidential campaign?
Well, look, the false prudery of the left-wing media, what they say off camera about the president, these people are toilet-mouthed individuals. The idea that now they're going to use this against the president, when in fact it looks as if it never actually happened. It's just about attacking a man who they still don't understand. Let's be clear. They don't understand why the American people voted for this man. And they know that Donald Trump understands some countries are hellholes. And most Americans agree with him. That's why they live here in America and understand America to be the shining light on the hill. So what will happen? Look, the Russia collusion delusion has become the left's Pizzagate. It is an absurd farce. It has come back to bite them on their rear end. Why? Because who's in trouble with regards to Russia? It's Hillary, and it's also the Obama administration, because now we're going to find out, thanks to brave people like Devin Nunes, who actually gave the order to target Americans on the Trump campaign, including the future president, with false information from a fake dossier provided in part by Russian actors. Look, we have some big scandals in American history, like the assassination of JFK, but this scandal is going to be one of the biggest when we get to the bottom of who gave that order in the Obama White House.
At what point do we decide as a country that we're not going to put up with a federal agency like the FBI or the Department of Justice, in which they carry out investigations that never result in a report, never result in a resolution of any kind, let alone consequence, for those who are accused of whether it's Benghazi, Fast and Furious, whether it's the IRS, whether it is, in point of fact, the Russians, we're told reliably from a third party, not from the FBI, hacked the DNC servers. We don't have straightforward evidence from any one of these investigating committees or agencies or departments. And that is an affront, it should be an affront to all Americans.
But Lou, we have things like your show, Sean Hannity, Sarah Carter, John Solomon. At the end of the day, I have great faith that all Americans will find out how much, the rot at the heart of the state of Denmark. And at the end of the day, somebody will pay a legal penalty, and it might be at the very highest levels of the Obama administration.
Well, I would only say, if those agencies haven't figured out what the American people have based on the evidence, then we're in sorry shape. And I can't be as optimistic as you. I hope you're right.